When he turned 16, the state gave him a key and a bus ticket. They told him he was free. But what he discovered at the end of that long road, inside an abandoned building that time had forgotten, wasn't freedom. It was a choice, and that choice would save his life. If you've ever felt like you were starting over with nothing, or if you've ever been handed a legacy you didn't understand, then this story is for you. Stick around, and maybe do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. The stories we share here are for the people who've had to fight for every inch of their lives. My 16th birthday started the same way every other day at the Northgate Youth Residence had, with the smell of industrial cleaner and the sound of someone else's alarm clock going off 2 doors down. But this day was different. This was the day I aged out. The day the system, after raising me for 12 of my 16 years, would politely and firmly show me the door. I'd been counting down to it for years, dreaming of it as the great escape. Now that it was here, all I felt was a cold, quiet dread that sat in my stomach like a stone. I packed my life into a single black duffel bag, 2 pairs of jeans, a few t-shirts, a worn paperback I'd read a dozen times, and a framed, faded photo of a woman I barely remembered, my mother. It wasn't much to show for a life. The bag felt too light. Downstairs, Mr. Henderson, the house director, was waiting for me in his office. He had that look he always got when he was about to deliver bad news or good news in the exact same monotone. Tired, a little sad, and fundamentally detached. "All right, Leo," he said, not looking up from a stack of papers on his desk. "Everything's in order." He slid a thick manila envelope across the polished wood. "This is your final paperwork: birth certificate, social security card, a debit card with your final stipend from the state. $200. Don't spend it all in one place." A small, dry laugh escaped his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. $200 to start a new world. It felt like an insult and a lifeline all at once. Then he pushed a second, smaller envelope forward. This one was different. It was old, the color of weak tea, and felt heavy for its size. My name, Leo Vance, was written on the front in elegant, looping cursive I'd never seen before. "This also came for you," Henderson said, finally looking at me. His expression had shifted, just slightly, a flicker of something like curiosity. "It was sent to the state's administrative office years ago, with instructions, to be given to you on your 16th birthday, no sooner." I picked it up. Inside was a single, heavy, old-fashioned brass key, tarnished with age, and a folded piece of paper. The key was ornate, the kind you see in old movies, with a complex, toothy end. The paper was a deed, a property deed, printed on thick, watermarked stock. It listed a plot of land and a structure at an address in a town I'd never heard of, Port Blossom, Oregon. And at the bottom, my name was listed as the sole inheritor. The previous owner was a man named Alistair Vance, my grandfather, a man I only knew as a ghost, a name in a file. The man my mother had run away from, or so the story went. "A radio station," I said, my voice a whisper. The deed specified the property as K-Wave Radio, 101.5 FM. Henderson just shrugged. "Looks like it. The state's legal aid office looked into it. It's legit. The property taxes have been prepaid for the next 50 years through an anonymous trust. As of today, it's yours. Lock, stock, and crumbling barrel, I'd imagine." He stood up, signaling the end of our meeting, the end of my time there. "There's a bus ticket in your main packet. It'll get you there. or you can cash it in. Take the $200 and the ticket refund and find a room somewhere in the city. Your choice, kid. You're your own man now." He tried to sound encouraging, but it came out flat. He was just another person paid to watch me, and his shift was over. I clutched the key in my hand. The metal was cold but solid. It was the first real thing I felt like I had ever owned. I looked from the key to the $200 to the bus ticket. I could stay, try to make it in the city where I knew no one and had nothing. Or I could go to this place, this Port Blossom, to a crumbling building left to me by a ghost. It wasn't really a choice. It was a pull, a whisper of a question that I had to answer. What was at the end of that road? Why would a man who had been a complete blank in my life leave me the only thing he had? I zipped the envelopes into the inner pocket of my jacket. The key felt heavy against my ribs. "I'll take the bus," I said. The bus ride was a long, slow severing. With every mile that passed, the city's gray skyline dissolved into the green and gray blur of the Pacific Northwest. I watched the world through the grimy window, my reflection a pale, hollow-eyed ghost superimposed over the passing landscape. For the first few hours, my mind was a static hum of institutional noise. The clang of the dinner bell, the squeak of sneakers on linoleum, the forced, hollow cheerfulness of the staff. 2 years of mandatory group therapy sessions where we were encouraged to share our narratives. 12 years of being a file in a cabinet, a case number, a problem to be managed until I was old enough to become someone else's problem. I had spent my whole life in rooms that weren't mine, sleeping in beds that had held 100 other lost boys before me. Everything I owned, everything I was, fit into that one bag on the seat beside me. And now I was heading toward a place I couldn't even picture, left to me by a man I didn't know. The bus was mostly empty, just a few other solitary travelers lost in their own worlds. An old woman knitting, a young man with headphones, a mother trying to quiet a restless child. I felt invisible, a specter moving between one life and the next. The dread in my stomach had slowly given way to a strange, brittle kind of hope. It was terrifying. Hope was a dangerous thing in a place like Northgate. It was the first thing they taught you to let go of, because hope was what broke you when it inevitably failed. You learned to live in the flat, gray space of the present. You ate the food, you did the chores, you kept your head down, you survived. But this key, this deed, it was a crack in that gray wall, a sliver of light from an unknown source. My grandfather, Alistair Vance. The file said he'd lost contact with my mother years before she had me. It said he was a recluse, possibly deceased. And yet, he had arranged this. He had reached out from the past, or from a grave, and placed this impossible thing in my hands. A radio station. It sounded like a joke, like something out of a book. I took the deed out again, unfolding it carefully. The paper was crisp, the language dense and legalistic. All said property, including the structure designated as K-Wave Radio and all broadcasting equipment therein. I traced the address with my finger. Port Blossom. The name sounded gentle, floral. I imagined a quaint little town by the sea, a place from a postcard. It was probably a lie. Places with pretty names were often the ugliest. The bus lurched and hissed, pulling off the main highway onto a smaller 2-lane road that wound its way through thick forests of pine and fir. The sky, which had been a uniform sheet of gray, began to darken. Rain started to fall, first as a fine mist, then as thick, slanting drops that streaked across the window, blurring the world outside. The air in the bus grew thick and damp. It smelled of wet wool and diesel fumes. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, the vibration of the engine humming through my skull. What was I doing? This was insane. I was a 16-year-old kid with $200 and a key to a ruin. I should have cashed the ticket. I should have found a shelter, gotten a job washing dishes, and tried to disappear. That was the smart play, the survivor's play. But survival wasn't what I wanted anymore. I'd been surviving my whole life. I wanted a story, my own story, not one written in a social worker's report. The bus driver, a heavy-set man with a kind, tired face, glanced at me in the rear-view mirror. "Almost there, son," he called out. "Port Blossom is the next stop." I gave him a small, tight nod. My heart started to beat faster, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I felt in my pocket for the key. It was still there, solid, real. The bus slowed, its air brakes sighing as it turned into a small, nearly deserted depot. The sign read, "Welcome to Port Blossom, Pop 742. The postcard image in my head shattered. This wasn't a quaint tourist town. This was a place that time and most people had passed by. I grabbed my duffel bag, the strap digging into my shoulder. As I stepped off the bus, the damp, cold air hit me like a physical blow. It smelled of salt, wet earth, and pine. The rain had eased to a persistent drizzle that hung in the air like a shroud. I was the only one who got off. The bus hissed and pulled away, its red tail lights disappearing into the gloom, leaving me utterly alone. The bus depot was little more than a wooden shelter with a peeling paint job and a schedule that looked decades out of date. The town of Port Blossom was huddled under a perpetual gray sky, a collection of low, weathered buildings lining a single main street, a tavern with a flickering neon sign, a grocery store with a hand-painted banner advertising a sale on canned soup, a closed-down movie theater with boarded-up windows. It was a town clinging to the edge of the continent and the edge of existence. There was a quiet, mournful beauty to it, but it was the beauty of decay. I felt a pang of despair. Of course, this was the place. Where else would a ghost leave his forgotten legacy? I pulled up the hood of my jacket and started walking, my worn sneakers splashing in the puddles. I needed to find the address on the deed. 14 Lighthouse Road. It sounded dramatic. I stopped a man who was walking out of the grocery store, an old-timer with a face like a weathered piece of driftwood. "Excuse me," I said, my voice hoarse. "Can you tell me how to get to Lighthouse Road?" He squinted at me, his eyes a pale, watery blue. He took in my duffel bag, my city clothes. "You're not from around here," he said. It wasn't a question. "No, sir." "Lighthouse Road? Ain't much up there anymore. Just the old lighthouse and the radio station." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "You ain't thinking of going up to the old Vance place, are you?" The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. The Vance place. It was real. People here knew it. "It's a long story," I said. He just shook his head slowly. "Folks round here tend to leave it be. Been empty for, 15 years now? Ever since Alistair just vanished." Vanished. Not died. Vanished. The word hung in the damp air between us. "Head north, past the docks," he said, pointing with a gnarled finger. "Road turns to gravel. It's about a 2-mile walk uphill. Can't miss it. Big, ugly concrete thing with a rusty tower next to it. Looks like a bunker. He gave me one last pitying look. Good luck, son. You'll need it. The walk was exactly as he described it. The paved road gave way to a muddy, rutted gravel track that wound its way up a steep hill overlooking the ocean. The town disappeared behind me, and the only sounds were the cry of gulls and the relentless hush of the waves crashing against the rocks below. The air grew colder, thick with sea spray. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. The old man was right. It did look like a bunker. It was a single-story, flat-roofed building made of poured concrete, stained dark with years of rain and moss. A huge, skeletal radio tower rose beside it, its red paint peeling to reveal a skeleton of rust. The windows were boarded up, and the front door was a slab of heavy steel. The letters K-Wave were barely visible, faded and peeling above the door. The whole place radiated an aura of profound and stubborn loneliness. It hadn't just been abandoned, it had been sealed. It was a tomb. My tomb, apparently. I stood there for a long time, the drizzle soaking through my jacket, just staring at it. This was it, the end of the line, the answer to the question. My inheritance. A concrete box on a forgotten cliff. A part of me wanted to turn around, walk back down that hill, and never look back. But I couldn't. I had to know. I walked up the cracked concrete steps, my heart pounding against my ribs. I pulled the brass key from my pocket. It felt warm now from my body heat. My hand was trembling as I pushed the key into the lock. It slid in with a smooth, well-oiled click. I turned it. There was a deep, resonant thud as heavy bolts retracted inside the door. I took a deep breath, put my shoulder against the cold steel, and pushed. The door groaned open on protesting hinges, revealing a wall of absolute darkness. A smell rolled out to meet me, the smell of a place that hadn't breathed in a very long time. It was a complex scent: dust, mildew, cold stone, and something else, something metallic and faintly electric, like the ghost of a storm. I stood on the threshold, peering into the blackness. The last of the gray afternoon light barely penetrated a few feet inside. I fumbled along the wall, my fingers brushing against cold, damp concrete until they found a switch. I flicked it. Nothing. Of course, the power had been cut decades ago. I pulled out the cheap disposable lighter I'd bought at the bus station, a purchase I'd made on a whim. The tiny flame flickered to life, a small, brave pinprick of orange in the oppressive dark. I held it up and stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me with a final booming clang that echoed through the space, sealing me in. For a second, pure panic seized me. I was trapped. But the panic subsided, replaced by a strange sense of calm. I was inside. The flame from my lighter illuminated a small circle, showing me a floor littered with scattered papers and a thick carpet of dust. I was in what looked like a small reception area. A simple wooden desk sat against one wall, an old rotary dial phone on its surface. A calendar was still hanging on the wall, its pages curled with damp. The date was stuck on August 1998, 15 years ago. I moved deeper into the building, the small flame my only guide. The main room opened up before me. It was a massive space, the heart of the station. Huge consoles, studded with a galaxy of knobs, switches, and meters, lined one wall. They were silent giants, sleeping under a shroud of dust. In the center of the room, turntables sat idle, their needles poised over records that would never play. Reels of magnetic tape were stacked on shelves, their plastic cases brittle with age. It was a cathedral of forgotten sound. I ran my fingers over a dusty microphone. It was heavy and cold. I could almost hear the voice that had once spoken into it. A deep, steady voice, telling stories, playing music, sending signals out into the dark. Alistair Vance, my grandfather. Was this his voice? I felt like a trespasser, an archaeologist stumbling into a pharaoh's tomb. Every object was a relic, a piece of a life I couldn't comprehend. I explored the other rooms, a small office, a bathroom, a tiny kitchenette with a jar of instant coffee still on the counter, the contents now a solid black rock. Everything was frozen in time, left exactly as it was on that day in August 1998. It was like the entire station had just stopped. In the office, a heavy oak desk dominated the space. Unlike the rest of the station, it was neat. Papers were stacked, pens were in a cup. It looked as if someone had just stepped out for a moment. I tried the drawers. They were all locked. I jiggled the handles, but they were solid. My gaze fell on a small framed photo on the corner of the desk, face down. My breath caught. I picked it up and turned it over. It was my mother. She looked impossibly young, maybe 17 or 18, smiling into the camera. She was standing on a beach, the wind in her hair. She looked happy, truly happy. I had never seen a picture of her smiling like that. Seeing her face, here, in this place, broke something open inside me. The grief I had kept locked away for so long washed over me in a sudden, overwhelming wave. My mother, who had died when I was 4. The woman I knew only from a single, sad photo and a file full of tragic details. Here she was, vibrant and alive. Here, she had been happy. I sank into the dusty chair behind the desk, the photo clutched in my hand, and I cried. I cried for the mother I never knew, for the grandfather who was a ghost, and for the 16-year-old boy sitting alone in the dark in a dead radio station with no idea what to do next. After a long time, the tears subsided, leaving me hollowed out and strangely calm. I put the photo back on the desk, upright this time. Her smile was a small beacon in the gloom. I had to get into these drawers. I looked around the office. My eyes landed on a heavy-duty letter opener on the desk, its steel point sharp. It wasn't a key, but it would have to do. I wedged the tip into the seam of the top drawer and pried. The old wood groaned, splintered, and then gave way with a sharp crack. It felt like a violation, but I had to know. The drawer slid open. It was full of files, neatly labeled, but sitting right on top was a shoebox sealed with yellowing tape. And on the lid, in that same elegant cursive from the envelope, was my name, Leo. My hands trembled as I lifted the shoebox out of the drawer. It felt both heavy and fragile, like it was full of secrets. I peeled back the brittle tape. The lid lifted with a soft sigh of escaping air. The first thing I saw was a stack of envelopes, bound together with a rubber band that had gone hard and was cracking. And beneath them, something that made my heart stop. Stacks of cash. $100 bills, neatly bundled. I lifted one out. It was real. I counted them, my fingers numb. There had to be tens of thousands of dollars here, maybe more. Enough to change everything. Enough to run away, to start over anywhere, to be anyone. For a moment, I was dizzy with the possibility. I could just take it. Take the money and leave this place. Leave this whole story behind. No one would ever know. But then my eyes fell on the letters. The top envelope was addressed to me. I pulled it from the stack. It was thick, heavy with pages. I took a deep breath, the dusty air filling my lungs, and I began to read. "My dearest Leo," the letter began. The handwriting was the same as on the box, but shakier here, as if written with great effort. "If you are reading this, then it means two things. First, it means you have survived. I never doubted you would. You have your mother's strength. And second, it means I have failed. I am sorry. I am so sorry for not being there to give this to you myself." The words blurred. I had to stop and wipe my eyes. This was his voice, not a ghost, not a name in a file, a person, a grandfather writing to his grandson. "I don't have much time to explain, and the whole truth is a long and dangerous story. But you deserve to know something. You deserve to know that you were not abandoned. You were protected. Your mother, my beautiful, wild daughter, she got into trouble. The kind of trouble that's easy to find in the city when you're young and trusting. She fell in with the wrong people, dangerous people, who saw her not as a person, but as a tool. When she found out she was pregnant with you, she was terrified. She came back here, to me, to this station. This was your first home, Leo. For the first few years of your life, you lived here. This place was filled with your laughter." I had to put the letter down. My head was spinning. I lived here? In this cold, silent place? I looked around the vast, dark room. I tried to imagine it. Music playing, a baby laughing. It was impossible. I picked up the letter again, my hands shaking. Those were the best years of my life. But the trouble followed her. The people she ran from, they didn't just let go. They came looking for her, for the money she owed them. One day, they found us. I won't burden you with the details of what happened, but your mother, she made a choice to keep you safe, a choice that cost her everything. After she was gone, I knew they would come for you next. They saw you as leverage, a debt to be collected. So I did the only thing I could think of. I made you disappear. I used every connection I had to place you into the state system under a slightly different name, erasing the trail. I made it look like you were an orphan, a ward of the state with no family. It broke my heart. It was like cutting off a limb, but it kept you alive. Then I vanished too. I prepaid the taxes on this place through a blind trust, and I walked away, letting the world think I was dead or gone. I built a new life, a small life, under a new name, always watching from a distance, making sure you were safe. This money in the box, it's everything I have left. It's for you. Take it. Go to college. Travel the world. Build a life your mother would be proud of. Forget this place. Forget me. Just live. That's all I ever wanted for you. This station is a tomb, Leo. Don't let it become yours. The key was a risk. Leaving you this trail was a risk. But I couldn't bear the thought of you turning 18 with nothing, thinking you were all alone in the world. You are not alone. You are loved. You have always been loved. Your grandfather, Alistair. I finished the letter, and the paper fell from my fingers. The silence in the station was different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of the past, full of a story I had never known. My entire life, the narrative I had been given, was a lie. Not a malicious lie, but a protective one, a shield. I wasn't abandoned. I was hidden. I wasn't an orphan in the way I thought. I was the survivor of a war I never knew was fought. I looked at the stacks of cash in the box, a fortune, a clean slate. a get-out-of-jail-free card. And Alistair's words echoed in my head. Forget this place. Just live. It was a gift, an incredible, selfless gift from a man who had sacrificed everything for me. All I had to do was take it, walk out that door, and never look back. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt free. But I didn't. I felt angry. Angry at the faceless people who had destroyed my family. Angry at the world that had forced my grandfather into this impossible choice. And I felt a deep, aching sadness for the life that was stolen from us. The life where this station was a home, not a tomb. I sat there in the dark for hours, the lighter long since dead, my world completely upended. The cold from the concrete floor seeped into my bones, but I didn't move. My mind was a whirlwind. I thought about Northgate, about the years of feeling like a piece of driftwood, belonging to no one, coming from nowhere. It had defined me. It had been the central, ugly fact of my existence. And now it was gone, replaced by a truth that was so much more painful and so much more profound. I wasn't a mistake. I was a legacy, a secret someone had died to protect. The money sat there, a silent temptation. I could feel its weight, its promise. A new life, no more looking back. It was the sensible thing to do. It was what he wanted for me. But as the first hints of dawn began to filter through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting long, ghostly fingers of gray light across the dusty consoles, another thought began to form. A stubborn, defiant thought. He called this place a tomb. He wanted me to run from it. But what if he was wrong? What if it wasn't a tomb? What if it was an anchor? What if the real gift wasn't the money? What if the real gift was this place? This story? If you've made it this far into my story, thank you. It's not an easy one to tell. And maybe it's hitting something in you. Maybe you've also felt the weight of your family's past, the secrets and the sacrifices you never understood. Maybe you've been given a burden that was also, in some strange way, a gift. When I sat there in the dark, I felt completely and utterly overwhelmed. It's a feeling I think a lot of us know. The moment when the path forward is terrifying and the path back is gone. If you've ever felt that way, I want you to know you're not alone. The whole reason I'm telling this story is to find the people who get it. So if this is resonating with you, I'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button and join the community we're building here. And I mean it when I say I read the comments. Let me know if you've ever had to face down a ghost from your past. Your stories matter. Now, let's get back to that cold, dark room. Because what I decided to do next changed the course of my entire life. I made a choice. It wasn't a logical choice. It was a choice born of grief and anger and a sudden fierce sense of loyalty to the ghosts of this place. I was not going to run. I was not going to take the money and disappear. That was their story. The story of my mother and my grandfather. A story of running and hiding. My story was going to be different. I was going to stay. I was going to fight. But fight what? Fight who? The letter was vague. Dangerous people. It wasn't enough. I looked back at the desk drawer. It was still full of files. If the letter was the heart of the story, maybe the files were the bones. I pulled them out. They were business records, invoices, broadcast licenses. Nothing that seemed dangerous. I went back to the desk, my resolve hardening. I pulled on the other drawers. Locked. Solid. I used the letter opener again, prying and twisting with more force this time. The wood splintered and cracked, and one by one, the drawers gave way. The bottom drawer was different. It was deeper. and it held more than just files. There was a small tape recorder, the kind journalists used to use, and a box of microcassettes. And beneath that, another bundle of documents, held together with a thick rubber band. This bundle felt different. It wasn't business records. The top page was a legal notice, a cease and desist order from a company called Westwood Development Group, dated July 1998. It accused K-Wave Radio of libel and slander. I scanned the document. Westwood was a real estate development company. They had been trying to buy up all the coastal property in the area to build a luxury resort. My grandfather, Alistair, had apparently been using his radio show to fight them. He'd accused them of illegal dumping, of threatening locals, of using strong-arm tactics to force people to sell their land. He was a thorn in their side, a big one. The other documents were copies of his own research, affidavits from local fishermen who had been threatened, water sample reports showing chemical contamination near a Westwood construction site. He had been building a case against them, a powerful one. This was it. This was the trouble. It wasn't just about my mother's past debt. Her old crowd and this corporation were likely connected, two heads of the same hydra. They wanted this land. They wanted my grandfather silent, and they had succeeded. He had vanished. The station had gone dark, and Westwood, I presumed, had gotten what they wanted. A cold fury burned in my chest. They hadn't just destroyed my family. They had silenced a voice that was trying to protect this whole community. I looked at the small tape recorder. I picked it up. It was heavy, solid. I pressed the eject button, and a tiny cassette popped out. I turned it over. It was labeled simply, "For Leo, the truth." My blood ran cold. He had left more than one letter. He had left his voice. I fumbled with the buttons, my fingers clumsy. I pressed play. The recorder whirred, and then a sound filled the silent room. Static. And then a voice. A deep, calm, resonant voice. The kind of voice that was made for radio. It was him. "Leo," the voice said, and hearing it was like being struck by lightning. It was real, tangible. "If you're hearing this, you found the rest of it. I hoped you would just take the money. I really did. But I knew you had my stubbornness in you, my refusal to let a story lie. So, you need to hear this. You need to know exactly what you're up against." The voice was older, wearier than I imagined, but steady. Westwood Development is not just a company, it's a front. The man who runs it, a man named Marcus Thorne, he's the one your mother got involved with all those years ago. He launders money for criminal organizations up and down the coast. He's ruthless. When I started broadcasting his dirty secrets, I thought I could fight him with the truth. I was naive. He doesn't play by the rules. He sent his thugs. They threatened me. They trashed the station. But I wouldn't stop. The day your mother died, it wasn't an accident, Leo. They made it look like one. But it was a message, to me, to be silent. The recorder clicked and hissed. I felt the air leave my lungs. I felt sick. "After that, I knew I couldn't protect you here," his voice continued, strained with grief. "That's when I set the plan in motion to make you disappear. But I couldn't let him win, not completely. The documents you found, that's the evidence. The original water samples, the signed affidavits, a ledger I got from an insider detailing his money laundering. It's enough to put him away for good. But it's also a death sentence if he knows you have it. I was going to hand it over to the feds, but I couldn't risk them tracing it back to you. So I hid it. I created a ghost story, an abandoned station, a missing owner. I hoped he'd eventually give up and the property would just sit here, a quiet memorial, until you were old enough to inherit it safely. There was a long pause on the tape. I could hear him take a shaky breath. There's a standing offer, Leo, from a holding company Thorne controls. They've been trying to buy this land for years, just to bury it. The offer is low, an insult, but it's a way out. Mr. Davies, the lawyer with the state who's managing the trust, he knows about the offer. You can call him. You can sell. Take their dirty money, add it to mine, and run. No one would blame you. It's the smart thing to do. The tape clicked off. I sat in the echoing silence, the recorder heavy in my lap. The whole story. The ugly, brutal, complete story. My grandfather hadn't just been a radio host. He'd been an investigative journalist, a warrior, and he had lost. Now the battle was mine. The choice was mine. Sell the land to the man who murdered my mother and destroyed my family. Take his money and live a comfortable life built on that blood-soaked foundation. Or fight. Use the evidence he died to protect and try to get justice. The harder right or the easier wrong. I thought about the $200 from the state. I thought about the years of feeling worthless, like human debris. I thought about my mother's smiling face in the photograph. I thought about my grandfather's voice, filled with so much pain and so much love. There was no choice. Not really. Not for me. I pulled out the manila envelope from Northgate, my hands steady now. I found the contact information for the state legal aid office. Mr. Davies. I took out my cheap burner phone, the one I'd bought with a little of the cash from the box. I had service. 1 bar, but it was there. I dialed the number. A crisp, professional voice answered. Legal aid, Davies speaking. Mr. Davies, I said, my own voice sounding strange to my ears, older. My name is Leo Vance. You were the administrator for my inheritance, the radio station in Port Blossom. There was a pause on the other end. Mr. Vance, yes, I was wondering if I'd hear from you. Did you find the property all right? His tone was cautious, measured. He knew more than he had let on. I found it, I said. I found everything. I know about the offer from Westwood Development. Another pause, longer this time. I see, he said, his voice lowering slightly. Leo, my advice to you as your legal counsel is to take the offer. It's clean. It's simple. You walk away with a significant sum and no complications. Was that my grandfather's advice too? I asked. Davies sighed, a human sound this time, not a legal one. Alistair Vance was a complicated man. He was brave and he was reckless. He set up this trust with very specific, very conflicting instructions. He wanted you to be safe. Above all else, he wanted that. Selling is the safe option. It's not an option, I said, the words coming out with a certainty that surprised me. I'm not selling. I have the evidence, the documents, the tapes, everything he collected. The line was silent for a full 10 seconds. I could hear the faint sound of the ocean through the thin walls of the station. Leo, Davies said, his voice sharp with alarm. You need to listen to me very carefully. Do not tell anyone else you have those documents. Don't even hint at it. The people at Westwood, they are not to be trifled with. They've been waiting for this property to come out of legal limbo for 15 years. They will not be happy to find Alistair Vance's heir sitting on it. I'm not just sitting on it, I said. I'm going to use it. I want to fight them. You're 16 years old, he said, his professional calm finally cracking. You can't fight these people. It's not a game. My grandfather fought them, I retorted. My mother died because of them. It stopped being a game a long time ago. Are you going to help me or not? There was another long silence. I could picture him in his office, pinching the bridge of his nose, weighing his duty of care against the raw, stubborn grief of a kid he'd never met. Alistair left one final instruction, Davies said slowly. He said if you chose to fight, if you were as stubborn and foolish as he was, I was to give you the name of a journalist at the Portland Herald, a man named Ben Carter. Alistair trusted him. He said Carter was the only one who would have the guts to run the story. But he also said it would put a target on your back the size of this state. He gave me the number. Leo, I'm advising you against this, officially. But unofficially, your grandfather was a good man. He deserved justice. He hung up. I stood there, the phone in my hand, the journalist's number glowing on the screen. This was the point of no return. I looked around the dusty, silent station. It didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like an arsenal. It felt like home. I took a deep breath and made the call. The fight had begun. The days that followed were a blur of clandestine activity. I didn't dare leave the station. It was my fortress. I used some of the cash from the box to order supplies online from the Port Blossom grocery. Canned food, water, batteries, blankets. And paid the delivery kid a handsome tip to leave them on the front steps and ask no questions. I spent my time methodically going through everything my grandfather had left me. I listened to all the tapes, not just the one addressed to me, but his copies of his own broadcasts. Hearing his voice fill the space, railing against corruption, playing soulful, defiant music. It was like he was right there with me, a ghostly mentor. I read every document, every affidavit, every damning report. I organized them, cross-referenced them, created a timeline. I was no longer just a grieving kid. I was a researcher, an archivist of injustice. Ben Carter, the journalist, was cautious at first. He'd been a cub reporter when my grandfather disappeared, but he remembered the legend of K-Wave and its firebrand host. I didn't tell him everything over the phone. I just told him I had new information about the Westwood case. We arranged a meeting. He drove out to the station a few days later. He was a man in his late 40s, with a rumpled suit and the weary, cynical eyes of a career journalist. But when I showed him the documents, when I played in the tapes, I saw a spark ignite in those eyes. It was the spark of a real story, a story that had been buried for 15 years. "My God, kid," he said, his voice a reverent whisper as he looked at the money laundering ledger. "This is it. This is the whole kingdom." Alistair wasn't just poking the bear, he had it in a cage. We spent the next 2 days in the station, which I had started to clean. I had wiped down the consoles, swept the floors, and found a set of emergency battery-powered lamps in a storage closet. In their steady, sterile light, the station looked less like a ruin and more like a command center. We made copies of everything. Ben would take the copies to his editor and the authorities, the right authorities, the ones Westwood couldn't buy. I would keep the originals here, my insurance policy. The night before he left, Ben looked at me across the main console. "You know what's going to happen when this story breaks, right? Thorne will know it came from here. He'll know Alistair's ghost has come back to haunt him." "I know," I said. "Let him come. This place was built to withstand a storm. Ben just shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You're your grandfather's kid, all right." He would have been proud. After he left, a profound quiet settled over the station again. But it was a different kind of quiet. It was the calm before the storm. I waited. I spent the time exploring the station more deeply. In a back room, I found the station's transmitter controls. They were ancient, a maze of vacuum tubes and heavy copper wiring. And next to them, a series of manuals. For the first time, I felt a flicker of a different kind of hope. Not just for justice, but for a future. What if this place could be more than an arsenal? What if it could be a radio station again? A week later, the story broke. It was the front-page headline of the Portland Herald. Westwood CEO linked to 15-year-old corruption and murder scandal. Ben's article was a masterpiece. It laid out the whole sordid history, using my grandfather's evidence, quoting his broadcasts, telling the story of the small-town radio host who had tried to stop a monster. The fallout was immediate. State and federal agencies, spurred by the public outcry, descended on Westwood development. Marcus Thorne's empire began to crumble. His assets were frozen. He was arrested trying to flee the country. It was all over the news. I watched it on a small, battery-powered television I'd bought. I saw his face, the face of the man who had haunted my family for my entire life. Now, just a scared, defeated man in handcuffs. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction, justice. But it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt quiet. The ghosts in the station were finally at peace. With Thorne's arrest, the threat to me evaporated. The legal battle over the land, however, was just beginning. Westwood's holding company fought to claim the property, but with Davies's help and the evidence of their criminal intent, their claim was eventually dismissed. After months of legal wrangling, the deed was cleared. The station, the land, the tower, it was all mine, free and clear. The money my grandfather had left me, I put it in a trust. I used a small portion of it to get the power to the station turned back on. The day the lights flickered to life, buzzing in the old fluorescent fixtures, it felt like the station was taking its first breath in 15 years. I spent the next year learning. I read the old manuals. I watched videos online. I taught myself about transmitters and broadcast signals, about audio engineering and FCC regulations. I hired a retired radio engineer from a nearby town to help me repair the old equipment. He was a gruff old man who had actually listened to my grandfather's show. He called Alistair a hero. Together, we brought the sleeping giant back to life. We replaced vacuum tubes, resoldered connections, and cleaned every switch and dial. One night, a little over a year after I had first walked through that steel door, I sat down at the main console. The boards glowed with a warm, gentle light. The meters were active. I put a record on one of the turntables, an old blues album I'd found in my grandfather's collection. I calibrated the microphone, the same one I'd touched on that first day. My heart was pounding, but it was a different kind of fear now. It was the fear of creation, of beginning. I took a breath, leaned into the microphone, and flicked a switch. The on-air light glowed a beautiful, brilliant red. "Good evening, Port Blossom," I said, my voice steady, sending it out into the night from the top of that hill. "This is K-Wave Radio, 101.5 FM. My name is Leo Vance. It's been a long time. I have a story to tell you." And that's where my new life began. In that moment, I understood what my grandfather had really left me. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the station itself. It was a choice. The choice to run from my past or to reclaim it. The choice to be a victim of my story or to become its author. He gave me the chance to finish the fight he started, and in doing so, to find myself. This station isn't a tomb. It's a lighthouse. It's a place that sends out signals, telling stories, connecting people who feel like they're alone in the dark. It's my home. I inherited a building, but I chose to build a home. It's a lesson that has defined my life. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't something you're given, but something you have to fight for. It's the story you choose to tell. So I want to ask you, what's the story you're choosing to tell? What are the ghosts from your past that you need to make peace with? You don't have to have it all figured out. Lord knows I didn't. But starting is what matters. Taking that first step, even when you're terrified. That's where your real life begins. Thank you for listening to my story. If it meant something to you, if it stirred something in you, I hope you'll subscribe and become a part of this community. We're all just trying to find our signal in the static. Share your own story in the comments below. I promise you, I'll be reading. You're not alone out there. Thanks for listening. We'll be back on air soon.